A lot of business owners start podcasts for their business for different reasons. Sometimes maybe they want to share information. Sometimes they want to get clients. A lot of the time, especially for business, where you know you're spending your business money on a podcast, you at least find somehow want to get people knowing about your business, knowing about what you do, and contacting you to work with you. Before we talk about that, most businesses don't succeed at doing that. And that's what we'll talk about today on the Tech Your Business podcast. Our topic today will be a follow up on our previous episode on podcasting for business. And today we'll talk about writing solo episodes that turn listeners to clients for your business. And to talk about that with us today is Isabella Sanchez Castaneda. So welcome to the show, Isabella.
Thank you so much. This is my favorite topic to get into. So I know that today's going to be a good one.
Thank you so much. So, can you tell us about your journey to podcasting, production, and how you got here?
Of course. So my background is in journalism. I studied journalism in college and was able to really learn what it means to tell a good story and to tell a persuasive story, because we can get into all of that, but ultimately you want people to believe something, you want people to see something. And so that is what we were doing in journalism. And I worked in a magazine for a while, and because my parents were both entrepreneurs here in the United States, I always had this feeling of, oh, I'm going to work in corporate because they were entrepreneurs. I saw the mistakes, the instability of it, and I didn't want that. But they always kind of said, you'll learn, you'll see it for yourself. And eventually I did, and shifted over into my own business. And from there was really able to lean on so many of the tools and strengths that I had from journalism and bringing them over to the podcasting space in particular.
Amazing. I think probably if my parents were entrepreneurs, I probably wouldn't have become one.
Exactly. You just know too much. I've seen too much, but it's actually been a really great support system for me.
Yeah, I think in my case, my parents weren't. My dad was a journalist, actually, when you think about it. So it's the other
Very
way
cool.
around.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So one thing people try to use business podcasts to do, and which you mentioned, is trying to replace sales calls with podcasts. So how does that
Mm-hmm.
happen? How can that happen?
Yeah. So I think first is allowing yourself to see that you don't have to do guest episodes every single episode, because people think, oh, if I'm just talking and they're getting to see me interact with another person, they will want to interact with me. And sometimes that is not the case. Most of the time, that's not the case, because the person you're highlighting is the guest. And so, first, it's accepting and being curious about what it looks like to do episodes where only you, as the host, are speaking. Then it's about choosing the right topics, because a lot of people say they want to replace their sales calls, but they don't see how that translates. So what people typically do when they do solo episodes is they start to do tutorials on what they do. Even if they're service providers where they do done for you work, they start to do tutorials, or they start to
Hmm.
do a lot of educating, which isn't normally what we do on sales calls. On sales calls, we are asking questions and highlighting problems, highlighting desires, but then people go on to their episodes and educate a little bit too much. And so that's usually where the disconnect starts.
Hmm. Okay, so can you go a bit into this? Because I'm aware of people who are doing different tutorials and all that, but can you go into this part where you talk about highlighting stories, desires, and questions?
Absolutely. So I will use fitness because it's the example that the majority of us have some sort of experience with, right? Where the majority of us, if we are looking to get healthier, let's say that we want to go run a 5K. We want to run 5 kilometers, and we've never done that before. Most people know generally, hey, if I eventually want to run a 5K, I have to go start moving my body, going on walks, eventually going on runs, and going from there. Most people generally know that to eat food that is more vegetables and more whole foods, as we would say, is probably going to help that journey towards running a 5K. So why do most people not do it? Most people don't do it because they're afraid of something. They are afraid of the effort that it'll take. They're afraid of doing it wrong. They're afraid that they will get hurt. They're afraid that it will be too hard, that they're afraid that their neighbor is going to laugh at them going on a run in the morning. They're afraid that their husband or wife or whoever is going to not support them. And so those are the real things. It's not usually lack of knowledge that gets in the way of us reaching our desires. It's usually a fear. So the mistake that people in the fitness world do is they go the Nike route and they go, just do it. You can do it. Or they go the other way and they go kind of in the really aggressive, like, oh, you're just lazy. You can't do this. Oh, you just don't get it. Neither one of those are helping the problem. So then someone comes down the middle and says, well, if I teach you how to run a 5K, then you might do it. But they're not addressing that. And usually the people who are listening to this show are going down that middle road because they do really believe in the person who's listening. They do really believe and say, well, if I give them a running plan on my podcast, that will do it. But it never addresses the real problem. They're not going to run the 5K. So if you're like, okay, why are we talking about running? It's the same thing in your business. They have some sort of desire for their business. They have some sort of desire for their life. Maybe they want better standard operating procedures and you're an operations person. They're usually not doing it because they just don't know how. We all have Google. We all have YouTube. We can download an SOP template in a day. But we're usually worried about, that's going to be so hard. That's going to slow down my team. What if I don't communicate it well enough? What if that's a waste of resources? And so most people go down the route of doing a podcast episode that says, this is how you write an SOP in 10 steps, when it should be more about addressing the fear, why they haven't done the SOP. So in that instance, you could do an episode that says how an SOP will actually speed up your team, not slow down your team. And then you use evidence to back up that point and address the fear that, oh, SOPs are going to slow me down. And on and on. Each episode should address a fear and create a possibility.
That's an interesting take. Very interesting take. Yeah. So now, I think one thing. Okay, let's say for instance,
yes.
For this podcast, I've done a couple of solo episodes, but the issue is that solo episodes can be really difficult to, first of all, script, then record, and then get out, because they need a lot of research, a lot more research than a guest episode. The guest episode is typically just knowing what the guest talks about and letting it flow from there. But solo, you have to get, at least from what I feel, you need to at least know the facts, so you don't go up and record something wrong that's going to be online forever and stuff like that. So how can you go over? Because like I said, it takes like maybe 5-6 times the time to record a guest episode that I need to take for a solo episode. So how do you get around that, or is it just normal?
Yes. So it doesn't have to take 6 times as long. It will take in the beginning a little longer, but that's okay. So what we usually do is I have a 7-step process, and the first 2 steps are, one, choosing that topic. So back to what we were just talking about, choosing the fear that you want to address. Would you be kind of willing to plan this out with me? We can do an example with you.
Okay, that's fine.
For you, what offer are you looking to promote in the next 3 to 6 months?
Okay, let's say instance setters. That's one of our products. So it's like voice AI for business websites.
Okay, so good. So now we're going to go into a topic, which is, what is one of the fears around this AI that a business owner would have before investing?
One of the fears they'll have is that it's going to make mistakes. It's going to make mistakes. Yeah.
And so, mistakes like what?
Mistakes like, these are leads that are coming into the business for the first time. So they might be afraid that it's going to say the wrong thing and they're going to lose that person and waste the money they spent on ads, getting that person into the funnel or into the business.
Okay, so you just made it more specific. So that's perfect.
Yeah.
So you could take what you just said in 2 to 3 different directions. You could take it and do an episode about how you work on making the AI more accurate for each business. And not how, as in like we code it this way and we put this in there, but you could talk about the accuracy of it and what you do when it makes mistakes, if it makes mistakes, or using information to back that up. Or something else that could say how using this AI is going to make your return on ad spend, your ROAS, higher. And because they're so worried about that, they think right now, oh, it's going to make it lower. You can say, no, it's going to make it higher. And this is how. So which of those 2 topics would you be interested in?
Let's see I think what do they call it? How we make it more accurate.
How to make it more accurate. Okay,
Yeah.
incredible. So now that we have the topic, that's always step 1. And we, for the listener who might be trying to apply this to their episodes, it's address that fear. Don't just decide to talk for the sake of talking. Address a specific fear. So we are addressing the fear of it's going to make an inaccurate mistake that will cost me a lead. Now, the second step is to create 3 points that are going to combat that fear in some way. So do you have any either testimonials, any statistics, or any personal experiences with the accuracy or inaccuracy of the AI?
No, I've not collected yet.
Okay. So what we can do is we can decide what the points are and then collect those things. So we can say, you can look up, usually it's like a Harvard Business Review or something like that, and say the accuracy of AI communication versus human communication. And you can pull statistics there. You can pull statistics around the data on the people who have used this software before, if they are reporting mistakes or not. So you might say, oh, the 10 people who've tried this or the 100 people who've tried this, whatever the range, out of those 100 people, we've only had this many reports of mistakes. And when they were reported, this is what we did. And so you would choose kind of those 3 things to relate back to how the AI can be more accurate and handle mistakes better than a human. And so now someone can listen to that and say like, well, you know what, that was my biggest fear around this. And or maybe it wasn't their biggest one, but it was their 3rd biggest one. And then you follow it up with a different solo episode where you're addressing the, oh, is this not going to feel as personal fear? And then you followed up with a different episode that says, is this going to cost me more money than just hiring a call center would be? And as you go, that's what really replaces the sales calls, is because you're handling objections from a place of very factual place, as well as pulling in those testimonials and different stories that you can back it up with.
Amazing. I actually never thought of it this way. So now when you talk about these solo episodes addressing the fears, different fears of your prospects, what length would you say is good? It's a good length for an episode.
Yeah, usually they range to about 15 minutes. They don't need to be much longer. My shortest episode is 4 minutes. My longest is like 20. And that's great because if you're also being really specific, it lets you get straight to the point and answer that person's question. A lot of the time, solo episodes that run way longer are covering way too many topics, or they're kind of rambling about their personal life in some way.
Yeah. Good. Okay, so I think one other thing, I think the length now makes it make a lot of sense because to me, most times when the episodes are too long, it's like you said, it just goes off points and off topic. So another thing I'll say is what way do you structure these solo episodes? First of all, the content of the flow, let's say, of the solo episodes. So it's something that a listener listens to the end, and also in the video towards the best way to structure the video too, so it's not boring. I think that's the word.
Yeah, that is such a good question. So the general structure, and I will dive into each piece. The general structure for me is a hook or attention grabbing statement. If you've been on Instagram and social media, you know what a hook is, right? Then you go into a promise statement. So each episode, you should be delivering on a promise. And if you're delivering on a promise, that can sound just like in this episode. You did it at the beginning of this episode, actually. You said, in this episode, we're going to cover how to create solo episodes that convert. So you would do the same thing in your solo episodes. So hook, promise statement, and then a little bit of context. Why are you bringing this up today? What is the story behind it? What inspired the episode? Or any language that they need to have clear. So for example, if you were to do the second episode we were talking about and you used ROAS as an acronym, you would need to explain at the very beginning of the episode, like, hey, whenever I say ROAS, that means return on ad spend.
Yeah.
And that makes sure that the person follows along, because most people log off of an episode because they don't understand something and the host didn't take time to clarify it. And so their brain goes into like overdrive, overheat, because they're confused by something. And we just as people don't like to feel dumb. And so if you explain things at the top, it's going to help listener retention overall. Then so to recap, you have your hook, your promise statement, your context, and then your 3 points. So your 3 points, each one, you'll dive into it, explain it, use a statistic if you have one, use a story that you can pull or an analogy, and then go through that each time. And something really important is always tie it back to your listener. So especially in a solo episode, it's really easy to fall into I speaking. And the second that someone says you, they go, oh, I'm back in the room, like I'm interested again. And
Yeah.
so if you can say that and you can say, hey, this is what I want you to take away from what I just said, and just recap it a little bit, that goes such a long way. And that engages the listener more. So the retention is higher. And then at the end, you always want to do a little summary and repeat the promise statement. So you'll say, hey, today I shared these 3 points with you so that you could understand X, Y, and Z. And every single time there's a call to action. Most people will do the most incredible solo episodes and they'll be so excited in it. And I'll listen and I'll be like, oh my gosh, where can I find out more? And they don't tell me. And so if you are doing a really good episode, go and add a call to action. Say, hey, if you enjoyed this, if you want to learn more about this, get on a no pressure call with me. Come and join. If that's not the vibe, if you don't do calls, maybe it's, hey, I did a freebie related to this exact topic. Go download the freebie. Tell your people where to go, because if you did a great job in the episode, which I'm sure you will do, they will want to do the next step with you. And then just sign off and say goodbye.
Oh, that's amazing. So one other thing I think as a podcast producer, which I would love your input on. For most podcasts, I've noticed, not mine actually, but for most podcasts I've noticed, because when I started this podcast, I looked at a couple of other podcasts and I noticed that over time, they stop producing content consistently, or they stop totally. So, and I know a lot of times it's because of overwhelming of the whole, because I know how the process is. I've been through all of it. I know it can be very overwhelming. So what would you say, what are some ways that business owners starting podcasts can streamline the process of scripting, recording these especially solo episodes? Because like I said, they take longer. If you notice, I stopped them for a while because they were taking a lot of mind space. So what ways can business owners streamline this process of scripting, producing, so that they can consistently bring out episodes and not end up either abandoning or doing being inconsistent with their podcasts?
Yeah, that is such an important question, because pod fade is our biggest issue. The in the whole podcasting industry, everyone loves to say, "Oh, podcasting is so saturated," but pod fade, like you're describing, inconsistency is so much bigger than the saturation could ever match up to. So the thing I asked you earlier when we were kind of doing your episode was, what is the offer you want to promote in the next 3 to 6 months? A lot of times folks run out of episode topics because they don't know where they're leading people to. And so if you know where you're leading people to, it makes it easier. So if you know that you have the one offer that you want to lead people to, then challenge yourself to write 6 episodes related to that. And now you know we're going to do it related to the fears, to the possibilities around this offer, and other related beliefs that they need to have around the offer. And so maybe for you, one of them could be you need to persuade them into seeing that AI can be really good and not a detriment. And there's still a lot of people who are skeptical about it. So doing episodes about that. And so if you're looking at an offer that you want to promote for the next 3 to 6 months, and you challenge yourself to do 6 topics around it, and you also have guest episodes, you can sprinkle them in every other week or every once a month, and you could have 3 to 6 months worth of solo episodes in one setting. And that doesn't mean, hey, sit down and script all 6. That can feel overwhelming. But you can sit down and choose 6 topics, and then choose, as we went through, the 3 points that can persuade someone to move a little bit away from that fear and move a little closer towards believing in the product that you're selling, or the offer that you're selling. And it doesn't have to come off as this like big sales pitch the whole time, because it is really valuable for the other person on the other side. And making sure that you're carving out time for it. So it can take an hour of just a strong brainstorming session to say, okay, this is the topic. These are the 3 points. I'm just going to get through it and go and record it. And a solo episode that's about 15 minutes can take you an hour to plan, especially if, for the listener, if you go back and go towards the structure where we broke that down of like hook, promise statement, everything. If you write that down on the side of your piece of paper, it's going to make it so much faster to outline.
Amazing. So now there's I think one other thing with podcasting is measuring the success, because like I said before, especially when a business is investing in a podcast, they want to know the returns from the podcast. They want to know a way to measure the returns from the podcast. So what's the best way? What metrics should a podcast host use when trying to determine the performance of these solo episodes they are putting out?
I'm going to say it's not listener numbers. Listener numbers are not the metric to track if you are a business owner, because I know that most business owners would be so happy to have 5 listeners who become 5 clients instead of 5,000 listeners and none of them buy. And so leave the listener numbers to the side for a second. Still look at them. I know you're going to look at them anyway. So just put them to the side. The 2 that I track consistently is email list subscribers and UTM clicks. So clicks over to my website or clicks over to my sales calls through adding a UTM link, which you can do really easily through, there's like a Google Analytics website for it where it says like add a UTM. And what a UTM is going to let you do is in your Google Analytics console, it will tell you where that came from, because most podcast show notes don't have tracking. So if any of you have clicked a link through Instagram, you will see that the link at the end will have a backslash and it'll say Instagram, it'll say source Instagram. That is a form of a UTM link. For podcasts, that usually doesn't happen. So when you go to look in your data, it's going to come up as unknown, and unknown is kind of unhelpful. So if we create a UTM link that says /source podcast, it lets us know, oh, that person booked a sales call because they saw the podcast, or, oh, that person clicked on our services page because of the podcast. And you can see, hey, this episode led to more than this episode. Same thing with the email list. Create a different landing page for your podcast. Even if it's the same exact landing page, duplicate it and put /podcast. So you know this person came to my email list because of the show versus this person came to me because of a paid ad.
Yeah, very good. So now you talked about the email list in this answer. And what is the best way to get people from your podcast to an email list? Is it through the call to action, or is there a way you can structure your episode to make that happen?
It is absolutely through the call to action. Like I mentioned before, most people just simply aren't asking. The ability to ask just makes it that much more likely. Then it's about strengthening the content. So if I have a freebie or I have an email list that is related to the topic, I want to make sure that it's fully related and that I make it obvious that it's related. Most people will do an episode, let's say about productivity, and then they have a freebie about recipes, and they don't tell me how the recipes is going to make me more productive. They just go, thanks for listening to this episode about productivity. Here's a free recipe guide. As the listener, I'm confused. I'm like, what? You just told me about time blocking. Why are you selling me recipes now? But if the host just took the time to say, actually, I just talked to you about time blocking for 15 minutes, and you could time block one meal planning block a week with the recipe guide that's for free in my show notes. Go download it. Then I go, oh, they're so related. Thank you so much. And that was a silly example translated over to, your business and making it specific, but just ask for the download, ask for the call to action, say it, and then make it relevant to the episode itself.
Amazing. So now I think one other thing, after recording the episode, after publishing the episode, what are the best ways for a podcaster to get more people, more relevant people to listen to or watch their podcasts? What are the best strategies?
Yeah. So I'm sure that most folks have heard of clipping their episodes, going ahead and putting those on social media, sending the email list, all of those good things. I stand by them 100%. I want to share one that you might not have heard before, which is use your podcast. So if you are going to networking events, or you had a sales call, let's say you had a sales call that didn't close, and you create a solo episode that's really, really relevant to that person, one of your follow-ups can be, hey, based off of our conversation, I was thinking a lot about it. And I actually know that there's an episode of my show that might answer some of your questions. Take a look at it and let me know what you think. You could do the same thing after a networking event. You could say, oh my goodness, we had such a great conversation about AI tools. And I know that you mentioned it was a little scary. So I want you to listen to this episode where I go into how AI can be safe and still keep your information private. Let's say that that's why they were afraid of it. And it invites them a little bit deeper down the funnel in a really organic way, because it's just part of your follow-up. And I know that your listeners have been in that situation where you're like, I really have to follow up with this person and I have nothing to say. I'm sitting there being like, hey, following up again. You can stand out if you say, hey, following up with this episode that made me think of you. And that gets you really relevant listeners more than just random listeners.
Amazing. Amazing. So now for listeners that have listened so far, what's one thing that you'd like them to take away from this episode? Maybe something I have not mentioned that you know would be relevant to them, that will be important to them, and would make their podcast actually profitable for their businesses.
Yeah. One thing is permission to not be a weekly podcast, because so many business owners, especially today, get really caught up in like, am I a business owner or am I a content creator? And that can really, really stress all of us out. Oh my goodness, I have this conversation in my head with myself every day, right? Where I'm like, oh, I didn't make content. Oh, but I have client deliverables. Oh, I didn't make content, but I have sales calls,
Yeah.
And so if you start and you give yourself permission to do episodes twice a month instead of 4 times a month, the quality of your episodes can actually go up. and it'll be more relevant to the listener, and you will have just a tiny bit of peace back in your schedule. And then eventually you can ramp up and have a bigger team around your podcast and go to 4 episodes a month, or you can have a better flow with it. But most people, you were bringing up pod fade and inconsistency before, is that they follow a schedule, a posting schedule that is meant for an influencer, and influencers are amazing, but that are meant for someone who's doing a different kind of business. But if you're a service provider, especially, give yourself that permission to do every other week instead of every single week.
And I actually agree with that. When I said this podcast, it was actually once a month, then once every 2 weeks. Then I think we were able to just schedule a few weeks where we did a lot of interviews, then schedule them ahead. If not, I don't think this once a week is actually sustainable on a normal.
And you just shared, like, you ramped it up, and that's beautiful. If you can do 12 episodes a year consistently once a month, that is incredible. Most people can't stick to something for a year. And so instead of being this like flash in the pan, go ahead and set yourself up for sustainability by doing once a month to get started, and then twice a month, and then maybe you stay there for a while before you go up any higher.
Amazing. So now, for listeners who have listened so far and they want to continue this conversation, they want to learn a lot more from you, because I've actually learned a lot, and I know this episode is going to be very valuable. Yeah. So how can they reach out to you?
Yeah, absolutely. So on all platforms, I'm at Isa Media Inc. So ISAMEDIAINC. And if you're okay with it, I can send over a link actually to a call to action guide. So I talked a lot about how you have to ask for the next step. You have to let them know what the next step is. And I break that down into a free guide where I talk about the 3 types of calls to action and how you can use them in your solo episodes.
Amazing. So what's the link to the guide?
I will send that over to you. So hopefully it'll be in the show notes.
Yes, and on
and
the
then
screen.
if not, yeah, exactly. And if not, if you do message me on Isa Media Inc. and you just say CTA guide, I'll send it over to you.
Oh, perfect. So Isa Media Inc. will be on the show notes in the screen, as well as the link to the guide once it's ready. So thank you so much, Isabella, for coming on. Thanks so much for sharing with us. Thanks so much for being so generous with your knowledge today on the podcasts.
Of course. Thank you so much for having me and for asking wonderful questions.
We've talked a lot about solo episodes today, about podcasting today, a lot that I too would put in practice on this podcast and any other our other podcast. We've talked about how podcasting can replace sales calls in your business, the type of episode you should be publishing in your podcast. We've talked about the structure, a simple episode structure that will create flow for you. We've talked about how to maintain consistency and avoid pod fade, how to put in a CTA in your podcast always. We've talked about the right metrics to track to know that your podcast is bringing a benefit to your business. We've talked about how to get people on your email list, and also how to get more people listening to your podcast, how to get more relevant people listening to your podcast. So with all this, I'm sure you can structure solo episodes for your podcast that will bring in clients, that will make your podcast profitable for your business. So if you know anybody who this would help, share this episode with them. Until next week, when we are back with a brand new episode, don't forget to keep taking your business. Bye for now.